Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome you to our public hearing on the second public hearing into the inquiry into the implementation of a regulatory framework for the development of financial technology, fintech, and e-payments. I would like to welcome the viewing and listening audience to the 11th meeting of the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. So today we are in fact convening the second public hearing pursuant to the inquiry, as I said before, into the implementation of a regulatory framework for the development of financial technology and e-payments. Members of the listening and viewing audience, we invite you and welcome your participation and ask that you send or post your comments via the Parliament's various social media platform, Facebook page, ParlView, the Parliament's YouTube channel and Twitter. We value your input. I would like to welcome officials of Fintech Association of Trinidad and Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center, and WePay Trinidad and Tobago Limited. I am the chair of this committee. I am Hazel Thompson Ahi, and I am now inviting members of the committee to introduce themselves.
Sure, Terence D.L. Singh, member, thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Keith Scotland, member.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jayanti Lachmdiyal, member.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I invite the officials to introduce themselves, I'd like to apologize for our late start. We were in fact awaiting a quorum, and that delayed our start of this public hearing, our meeting and the public hearing. So we have before us today, Fintech Association of Trinidad and Tobago. I invite the officials to introduce the team, please.
Good morning, everyone. Maria Daniel, the current president of Fintech Association. And with me, I have Helen Lianos, our general manager.
Good morning.
Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center, please. Introduce your members.
Sure. Morning, Chair, morning, members. John Outridge, Chief Executive Officer of the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center. And with me is Mr. Carlos Newton, Manager of Financial Systems and Service Delivery.
Officials of WePay Trinidad and Tobago Limited, please introduce your team.
Pleasant morning, Chair. Alden Wayne, CEO of WePay Caribbean, and John Valentiel, Chief Strategy Officer of WePay Caribbean.
So welcome to Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center members and officials of WePay. The inquiry objectives are: 1, to determine the extent to which fintech is available for use in the local economy and projections for its growth. And secondly, to examine the challenges that may arise with greater fintech use and the sufficiency of regulatory measures. I now invite to make brief opening remarks, a maximum of 2 minutes, Ms. Maria Daniel, President of Fintech Association of Trinidad and Tobago.
Morning again. Looking at the objectives, let me just give you our role in fintech. And first of all, for everyone to understand, in very layman terms, fintech is really using technology to provide financial services. And it's in its widest sense, it's banking, it's insurance. And when we talk about banking, it's payment solutions, lending, investments, wealth management, and providing insurance services and even regulatory services, but using technology as the vehicle to deliver these services. So the Fintech Association was actually born in around 2020, coming out of an exercise that the TTIFC actually engaged upon to really explore Trinidad as, how do we get ourselves in the fintech space? And there was a roadmap that was created for the country to move towards effectively a digital economy and more of a cashless society, because we are all aware of the issues we have with too much cash in our system right now. So the association was really the vehicle that will bring together the stakeholders, the members, professional services, individuals, students, people who were interested in the fintech society, people who were interested in getting fintech moving in Trinidad and Tobago. So the association is really there to bring members together, stakeholders together, deal with the regulator, be that voice with the TTIFC, working with the TTIFC to actually build the sector in Trinidad and Tobago. So in terms of your objectives, understand that technology, and the reason that technology is being introduced as a vehicle is to reduce transaction costs and to make available financial services that would not be available in far regions, where before a bank would have to set up bricks and mortar staff, and it would be uneconomical in certain regions to have those banking services. So the benefit of fintech is really, and John will use this word much more than me, financial inclusiveness. It's really to ensure that services are available for everyone at an affordable price. And it's not just about payments and transactions, but it's about getting access for SMEs for lending. It's about, lower cost insurance products. So when you look at it from an economical perspective, and I'll stop here because everybody else on this panel will have a lot about this to say, it helps your entrepreneurial companies to also grow. So it is definitely a vehicle and a driver of economic growth. And yes, there has to be a framework that protects anything that involves money, but it also has to understand that the old regulations may not be the regulations that will work for a fintech solution. So I will close there.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we can now hear from Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center, Mr. John Outridge.
Hi, morning, Chair, and thanks, and morning again, members. Thanks again for inviting the TTIFC to be a part of what I think is a very important discussion regarding fintech. As Ms. Daniel was alluding to, it is basically a very good way in terms of how do we now also grow the economy from using this as a viable sector, but at the same time allowing people to be part of the formal economy through financial inclusion. And in my brief opening remarks, just to give a little overview on the company, the mandate of the TTIFC was adjusted back in April 15, 2021. And that's what the company focusing really on three key areas, which again is going to be tying into a lot of the discussion today and representative from some of the members here on this call, where we are looking at increasing financial inclusion via fintech, driving the digitalization of payments across the public sector, allowing ministries, departments, and agencies to leverage fintech technologies as it relates to receiving revenue as well as disbursing funds to citizens. And also, through those two exercises, establishing Trinidad and Tobago as a fintech-enabled hub. Because the theory is, once we start to drive digitalization using the government as a catalyst, that will create the business case for the rest of the sectors. It will allow us to understand what are the gaps, what are the regulations, the policies that we need to put in place for Trinidad and Tobago really moving towards a cashless society.
Mr. Alwyn Wayne, Chief Executive of WePay now.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. So WePay, which was founded in Trinidad and Tobago, is the Caribbean's largest payment facilitator. WePay was created, to embody everything that Maria and John just spoke about, which is financial inclusion. All right, we created a platform that would allow for everyone in society, whether it be big businesses or the doublesman, to make and receive payments digitally. The goal of WePay was to grow this so that the Caribbean could see or be part of the new industry, the fourth revolution, the digital revolution, because we make products here in Trinidad and in the Caribbean that the world consumes. Getting those people paid will be the catalyst for growing this industry, and that's why WePay was founded and was created so that everyone can be paid, no matter the size of your business and what you sell. So now we can partake in that fourth industrial revolution. So that's WePay, and that's the goal and mission that we are on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wayne. We will now commence the questioning. And I want to remind everyone, committee members, officials, direct their questions and concerns through the chair. Activate the microphone on your devices when you're acknowledged, given permission to speak, and turn it off when you have concluded your contribution. We will commence with officials of the Fintech Association of Trinidad and Tobago. And we thank you for your submission. And you are free to choose who will respond to the questions directed at your agency. Now, when we look at objective 1, to determine the extent to which fintech is available for use in the local economy and projections for its growth, and on page 2 of your submission, you stated that fintech plays a pivotal role in facilitating all of the stakeholders and players in the fintech space. Tell us, what additional measures should be implemented, you think, to engage all relevant stakeholders? You know, of course, you have something that is relatively new, and some people will feel that they have been left out of the process. So tell us what additional measures you're going to use.
So
yes, go ahead.
So let me start with some very basic fundamentals for this to work. And fintech and, to build fintech, it's what I call a community ecosystem. So what do I mean by that? For a fintech company to work, and Alwyn will have experienced this, is you have to have adoption. And what do I mean by adoption? You have to have all members of society using some of these solutions for it to really be effective. And for that to work in a small country like ours with 1.3 million people, you have to have the government, the regulator, the availability for financing, and then you have to have the general public participating. So in terms of your comments about some people feeling they've left out, the TTIFC, and John will probably talk about this a bit, just had a workshop, a 3-day workshop, trying to do exactly that, which is to pull together, a lot of these stakeholders so we can have general discussion. We, the Fintech Association, have been meeting with the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago and will continue to do so, to talk about the issues around the regulations, the policies, helping fintechs actually get the approvals to be up and running. And that's one of the stumbling blocks right now. It's having a framework that is supportive of a fintech company and its operations, whilst ensuring, of course, there is risk management and protection. A fintech is very different from a traditional bank, and we need to understand that. And therefore, some of the discussions and dialogue we're having with the central bank is how do you now create policies that takes into account those differences, but also allow the regulator to do its job. Right? So when we talk about what measures, we need to be a little quicker, well, not a little, a lot quicker with legislative changes. I wear many hats in my life. And if I take, for example, how long it took for the Insurance Act to pass, if we were to do that in the fintech space, we will be 100 years behind the rest of the world. So I think it's important that we understand that if we want Trinidad and Tobago, and I know this is TTIFC is one of their biggest mandates, to be a leader in the financial services sector in the Caribbean, we have to have innovative legislation, forward-thinking legislation. We have to have regulations that support but protect. And we really need to get government as a user of these services. And I think that's where the TTIFC is really trying to start with. So the government needs to be a user of these services because, again, as I told you at the beginning, this is about building an ecosystem. And you have to have merchants, and you have to have customers, and you have to have players in order for this to be effective. So, Helen, I don't know if you want to add anything there.
Yeah, just to add to what Maria is saying, what we are also doing, and she spoke to working or collaborating with the existing bodies in this space, such as the TTIFC, Central Bank, etc. What we are doing is educating as much as possible the widest range of the publics that we can. So we have a hackathon, which is going to be launched at the end of June, running through to August, which will reach out to all of the interested parties who want to get involved in hackathons. It could be from under 15, over 15 into their 20s. So you talked about earlier inclusivity of the entire country and the ability for everyone not to be left out. The hackathon, although it culminates in a final day when the ideas are presented, between June and August, we also have what we call member spotlights and financial education spotlights, which are open to the public. So those will be advertised as well. So everybody can get involved in learning about fintech as well as financial, smart, if you want to call it that. So the hackathon is one of those. The second one, we have committed to work along with Central Bank to help them or assist the applicants for the e-money order, etc., to understand the nuances of the regulations and why they're important, because many times fintechs are born out of technology, and technology, there's other areas within a business that need to be addressed to ensure that that technology is safe and secure, because we hear about cybersecurity all the time, and part of that regulation is to ensure the safety of those payment vehicles.
Yeah, thank you, Helen.
Thank you.
And just if I could add, Chair, right, seeing that I, have this audience, what do we need to make fintech works, and where government is pivotal in this, is just starting with the national ID. I know there have been talks about it. There have been, some work being done with it. But if we had a national ID, one unique ID for everyone, the KYC, and being able for these fintechs to offer solutions will be solved. And this is where, we need government to play a pivotal role. There are certain foundations, and Alwyn and John will, I imagine, talk about this, that has to be there for this to work. And it is in everybody's benefit. As John said, it's an economic growth enabler. The rest of the world talks about digital economies. We can't have digital economies without digital financial services.
Thank you. Have you conducted any, or are you conducting any research concerning development of fintech in Trinidad and Tobago?
Well, what we have, as Helen said, is, we have our members, we talk to our members. I mean, there have been many research papers done, so I don't think I'm going to add to that. The question is, what are we doing with the results of the research papers that have been done? So there have been some research done by CAF. I remember either last year or year before. John, you would know better than me. Looking at, do we have an unbanked population? And I think the conclusions are we actually have more of an underbanked population. And what that means is people can have access to bank accounts, but may not have access to all the services. We do have some unbanked. The question is, are they unbanked voluntarily or because they can't get into the system? So, that's kind of the work we're doing, because in order for anything to work, you have to have users. So the most important thing is really getting users. And how do we get users? So Helen spoke about public education. So that's what we're trying to do. We're working with the TTIFC. We've been talking to UTT in the past as well, of how do we get this public education out there so that people will use these services. So that's more where our focus is. And I don't think doing another survey is going to reveal anything that we don't know already.
I see. Mr. Scotland?
Chairman. Oh, sorry.
No, sorry, Mr. Scotland. You could. Okay. I think he's giving way. Chair, through you, could I just ask a quick question? Because Ms. Daniel mentioned the electronic ID registry. Do you believe, or is it the feedback that you are getting from the research conducted, that there is a concern about the security of digital records such as national identification and so on the government side? Because recently we've seen, for example, information about cyber hacking at private institutions and so on. And do you believe that the public, the public that you interact with, that you try to educate and so on, and you try to get buy-in from them, that they have a concern about the state having digital records and about the security of their information? I place this in the context that it has arisen from time to time that we still do not have a fully rolled out and implemented Data Protection Act. And that concern has been expressed to me from time to time. So what's your view on that and about the safety and security of digital records, which, as you say, could help promote and enhance the rollout of fintech?
Yes, and you're right. And I think that people have that concern, but it goes back to knowledge, right? So if you think of where technology has gone in the blockchain, which is a very secure system, the question is, what is the technology we're going to use? How do you make the public feel comfortable? And this goes back to trust. So this is trust more of the government, but the government has your records anyway, manually. Your passport information is there somewhere, everybody's date of birth. So I think the solution is in people understanding the security of the technology, right? And blockchain and distributed ledgers are definitely very secure. I don't know why we in Trinidad and Tobago think we're any different to the rest of the world. It's being used everywhere else. So I think it's about, again, the education and people understanding how it's going to work, how access is available, who will have access to it. And just to answer your specific question on the data privacy laws, that has to be passed, again, for people to feel confident around it.
Oh, can I just add to that? So I take it from a different angle. For me, the electronic ID will help fintechs who have a solution meet the KYC and AML requirements. Because right now, so for example, in the financial space, each finance house has their own KYC AML infrastructure. If you want to create a little wallet, for example, and you want to onboard people, especially underbanked, who don't want to go into a financial environment, and you ask them to upload their information, there's nothing to check it back against. So it then becomes very onerous on what I call the small fintechs to build an entire KYC AML infrastructure to meet the regulators' needs. So if there was a national electronic ID system that they can check the information against quickly, this would also enable fintechs to grow.
Yeah, and that goes back against people understanding how it will also benefit them. It will make doing business in Trinidad so much easier.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair, just one follow-up. So just to be clear, what you're envisioning is the government basically building out an infrastructure that would facilitate easier KYC and so on, and the fintech companies, if you want to call them that, having access to it, but it's not a public type thing. So, but right, and that could also bring on board all the financial institutions, all of the non-financial.
And I was now about to tell you that. Yeah.
Right, because there are lots of small organizations, jewelers, car dealers, attorneys who have to do this type of work. So you're saying that everyone who comes under the process of crime law as a listed business and the financial institutions could be able to access this database and make their KYC onboarding process a little bit easier. Yeah. But my specific question was really whether you feel on the government side, you said you believe it's very secure and the technology is there for it to be secure and it's all over the world. I think that the concern that people have here is the government having this system and it being secure and not being.
That's why I said trust, right? It goes back to trust. But it doesn't have to be the government. It doesn't have to be the government. It could be the banks and the insurance companies come together and understand this, that the customer still has to give the approval for somebody to get the access to the database. Correct. So you are protected there. I mean, to me, it is best within government in a trusted environment. How we structure that, it's really up to looking at different options and different frameworks that have worked in different countries, and really looking to see which one best suits Trinidad and Tobago.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think Mr. Scotland had a question.
Chairman, through you. In your submissions, you stated that a helpful tool will be the standardization of the EMV QR code standard in consideration of the ISO 2022. That's at page 6. Has Fintech engaged the government with a view to obtaining support to standardize the technology that will support the introduction of additional Fintech products?
Helen, I'm handing that one because I know that's your baby.
The standardized QR code is critical for interoperability between all the various fintech payments and bank payments that will be coming along, anything that's in the e-space, Keith. So in Singapore, many years ago, everybody came out with a QR code that was different. And some were not as secure as others, and it led to fraud. So what we are working on, or what we are putting forward, is a standardized EMV code, and that code put out by EMV Co. is really a very secure standard, and I would like to recommend that we go with one. Have we approached government on this side? We have started talking. I did do a presentation to the TTIFC a while back on it, but in terms of pulling together more of the stakeholders, we still need to do that, yes.
And just for the listening public, and there's a lot of technical knowledge, jargon there. All this means is that all financial services, all banks, everyone can speak to each other through the technology. That's what interoperability means. It means enabling easy transfer of funds between different financial services.
So could you tell the listening public and tell the committee, Chair, through you, what has been the general feedback from the government?
Can you rephrase that for me, Keith?
Well, I don't think, honestly, I don't think, Mr. Scotland, that we can answer that question because that isn't really where our association comes in. I think maybe if I may suggest that, the TTIFC can respond to that because they are really what I will consider the flag bearer. That's the term we kind of used in the roadmap between government and the sector and pulling together what government needs to do and working through government and what the fintech services need to do. John, I'm hoping I'm putting you on the spot there.
Chairman, would you allow that question to be answered now?
Yes.
Okay, I'll take that cue. Morning, Member Scotland. So coming off of what Maria would have mentioned, and this is one of the key things the IFC is sort of focusing on, right? Because our focus till the end of the year, we are basically putting all our efforts in terms of working through the public sector to enable these sort of various fintech type payment facilities, right? Because what we are trying to promote is financial inclusion and not financial exclusion. So from the point that was referenced from Helen and Maria just now in terms of suggestions, in terms of the standardize and working with companies like EMVCo, right? And just for the audience from the technical terms, EMVCo basically represents the large card networks of the world, MasterCard, Visa, etc. So those are the companies that sort of mandate standards and sort of control the security and basically run all of the financial rails that allow us to transfer money back and forth. So in terms of where we were, and I know Maria mentioned it, we are coming fresh off a 3-day workshop last week from the 17th to the 19th, where we basically had meetings with the joint regulators, the central bank, the SEC, members of the government, Ministry of Finance, the Treasury Division, other entities who are also part of the government roadmap, as well as the fintech community, to really sort of discuss and sort of map out what is the sort of architecture that we need to be focusing on. Because I know looking at the last JSC, and this was something, again, this is very important why these JSCs are held, so that we could understand where the gaps and where we need to do better and address was the lack of coordination amongst all of the stakeholders and the parties, right? Because we do have fintech high on the agenda in the country. WePay is here. WePay has been doing what they have been doing for a long time. Fintech TT ourselves. We have the regulators who have also been looking at fintech as well as the government. So one of the key things coming out of that workshop was, again, to what Helen mentioned, we basically need to develop a roadmap in terms of what will fintech in Trinidad and Tobago in our current context look like, and what do we need to start with first, and what are the enablers that we need to make the investments in order for us to really move towards that cashless society and sort of leapfrog the rest of the region.
If I may ask a question, please, through you.
Yes, please proceed, Minister.
Any member of the panel. Ms. Daniel spoke about adoption earlier. I want to ask, what has been the rate of adoption? I would imagine the private sector are going to be the innovators and early adopters of this technology. What has been the rate of adoption of industries like the banking industry for mortgages and loans, the insurance industry for insurance products, and maybe brokers for their stock, for selling stocks and so on? What has been that? Do you have any information on a percentage basis, what percentage of mortgages are done via fintech and so on? Thank you.
I will start, but I will ask anybody, especially WePay, to jump in here. So they have, your question is actually many different sectors of it, right? So let's start with, you have the banks trying to work with fintech solutions. Right now, that's how it's really working, except for WePay. And WePay still has to have its own affiliations, and I don't want to speak for WePay. So when you're talking about fintech solution, right, we're looking at financial services and being able to do that online or digitally. So right now, what has plagued, I would say, our legacy or our traditional banking sector and the insurance sector is really the technology part of it. So they have huge legacy systems, and to be able to be agile now to do all the digital solutions is difficult. And this is why fintechs, which are usually startup companies, have been born, because it has been difficult for the banking sector and the legacy systems to really get digitally, as advanced as they should be. Now, if one, I know, Mr. Dial Singh, this is up your alley, but your COVID actually helped us there. So, COVID has actually one very big benefit from it is the adoption has rose significantly. So online banking solutions have gotten a lot better, where they have improved in the last, I would say, 12 to 18 months. It was much quicker than what we would have seen in the last decade. So, but one of the things, a lot of the insurance companies, et cetera, were saying is digital signatures were not accepted before. So a simple thing like in your regulations to allow digital signatures are important in order for the same question you have there for it to be enabled. But I'll stop there and let the other members of the panel add to that, especially WePay from the technical side, and John and Helen, of course. So, if that is okay.
Yeah, I'm going to take the cue, like John said from you, Maria. Yes, Member Scotland. Adoption. As Maria said, COVID accelerated adoption. But prior to COVID, we were seeing, great use of our platform because of the problem it fixed, right? And, just taking a step back, in terms of how we understand the word fintech and what we understand it to mean, because I'm kind of sensing, it's kind of all bulk into one thing, but fintech is not actually like a product per se. It's financial technology, right? How you use technology to aid the financial industry. And it could go from banking to insurance to, as maybe I mentioned, KYC, onboarding, right? So it's not one thing specific per se. It's the industry on the whole. And for us, in the last couple of years, we're like 4 years old, 5 years this year, the adoption is based on being able to get or meet people at their point of understanding or their point of need. We did court pay in Trinidad 2 years ago. And during COVID, it was mandated that for maintenance payment, you use court pay. Now you have 100% adoption of everyone who has a maintenance payment to use the court pay platform. All right. It had, I think, 2 laws passed by AG at the time, Faisal Sawari, for payments in and out of court. Legislation put in place. Adoption was, spotty at first because you had, the Law Association, you had, just people in the industry saying, hey, why are we trying to force people on technology? And then literally a month after, you hear the AG come to Parliament and say the only thing that was working during the earthquake was court pay because all the courts were shut down. And then they went further to make it work during COVID as the only way to pay your maintenance rather than going to the courts. So for adoption, both Maria and John articulated, government or state entities would be the driver for it. COVID did help, but it do start at, the government or the state entities angle because of the fact that in the Caribbean, those are the largest employers, those are the largest customer base, right? And people would adopt it. Right, as we could attest to it when we start, I guess, on our questions. But just to answer Maria's question, yes, adoption is there. COVID did help it. And I think the industry on the whole, the fintech industry on the whole, because of what you're seeing happening globally, and because we are so connected via social media and all these platforms, Trinidad and the Caribbean, by extension, is very ready to use financial technology services. That fits the need, fix the problem.
Can I ask a follow-up question, Madam Chair? Because the gentleman made a very important point, and we must remember that this is a public hearing, and I think the average person in the street looking on will be glad to hear about court pay and maintenance services being able to be made digitally. Could you tell members of the public who are viewing this, speak to them who don't know about fintech. Speak to them and tell them, in addition to these maintenance payments, what other payments can they make via fintech to make their lives easier? Speak to the man in the street.
Thank you, Honorable Senator. I guess I'm do a little WePay PR here, but I mean, the Senator put me on. But yeah, so CorePay, which was introduced in 2018, the problem that in Trinidad we had to fix was the judiciary had, I think it's like 27 courts spread out across Trinidad and Tobago. And if you had a maintenance matter in Point Fortin, right, and the matter was agreed upon that you make payments into court in Point Fortin, and you happen to move to Port of Spain, every week you had to go back to Point Fortin because your files was right there in Point Fortin. Both the payer and the recipient of the matter had to drive back to Point Fortin, regardless if they live in Port of Spain now or Tobago. They must go back to that same court to make the payment and get it out. It was all stored in a drawer. The the judiciary had millions of dollars in, wooden drawers in courthouses.
No, I understand that. I'm asking you to talk to the taxi driver, talk to the layperson outside of court pay. What other avenues exist for them to make payments that will make their life easier? I'm giving you an opportunity to sell this to the average man in the street.
All right. So beyond court pay, which made it easier for you to make payments into court, we did work initially with Ministry of Trade, and you could pay for your barrels and stuff online via the Ministry of Trade website. We had, I don't see member Gonzalez, but we did work initially on the U-turn system, but we could talk about that later. There's a number of online solutions that we've worked on, but, and in my contribution later, I would mention why it probably didn't reach to the fore. But there are systems beyond court pay, Ministry of Trade being one, that, in Trinidad and Tobago is ready to go online, just waiting like final approval. But there are a number of solutions that, within the last 3 years within government and state agencies have, reached to that, finish line for utilizing fintech technology for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago to make payments into government and state entities.
Yeah, but let me just...
Mr. Wayne, sorry.
No, I wanted to add there specifically to answer this question, right? The truth is, there aren't enough services available to pay the way we are speaking about. And this is what the whole drive for is, to build the sector. Because there are things, there are different... there's still regulations and frameworks, so people who have products can't bring it to the market, right? So one of the biggest...
I wasn't saying there was enough, huh?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There isn't... No, but I'm answering Minister Dial Singh here to sell it. So you have... Let me just go back a little bit, because you asked about mortgages and lending and stuff like that. So you do have solutions there. You have term finance. They're all using technology to grant loans faster, etc. But again, WePay is trying to bring a solution, and they have, but it's not broad enough as yet. We don't have real wallets working, and cash is trying from Republic Bank, but you still need a credit card to build up your wallet.
Because this is a public hearing, and I think I want to make sure the proper information is out there. Misinformation, I think, is the biggest problem we have in Trinidad of what fintech and the value of fintechs are. WePay has been successful. We process hundreds of millions of dollars every single month. Hundreds of millions in Trinidad, right? Tens of millions in Trinidad, hundreds of millions across the Caribbean. And why we've been successful is because fintech is not, like I said, a product or a brand. Solutions are not solutions that you build because you try to make money. You have to fix a problem. And there's a bunch of people tossing up, I have an app, or I could build fintech, and it's not fixing a problem, right? If your solution doesn't fix a problem, then it won't get adoption. WePay has been blocked every single step of the way, but we have great adoption because we fix problems, right? So my position here today, coming in as the leader in the space in the Caribbean, right? I just gave this speech last week in Washington, D.C., what the advancement of fintech is in the Caribbean is based on solving solutions, right? Not depending on, adoption from only state entities and, government entities, which is the main driver, of course. But before you get to state entities and government entities, you need to solve a problem. You need to solve a problem that, would make the lives of everyone, citizens, users of your platform better. And if all you're doing is saying, hey, I have an app that could do, mobile wallet, what does a mobile wallet solve in the Caribbean? Our islands are, 10, 20 miles across, right? I'd much rather meet you in Port of Spain and give you the cash. So you are keeping us, our industry back if all you're doing is trying to say, hey, I'm mimicking something I see in Kenya. Because Kenya is hundreds of miles across. So I would love to send you money where I don't have to, take a bus, for 5 hours to get to you. But are we solving a solution if I'm in Port of Spain, downtown, and you are in, Newtown, and you're saying to me, it's costing me money to put money on an app and then send to someone in Newtown that they get like 2% less. You want to get a second, come downtown and hand you the money. You're not fixing a problem, you're causing a problem. And that's why the industry has a bunch of products that's coming into the market, failing, fantastically failing, because all you're doing is spending money on marketing that's not fixing a problem. And I'm
Mr. Wayne, Mr. Wayne, if I may, Mr. Wayne, can't you use court pay to pay court fines?
Yes.
All right.
To pay court fines. Yes, so court pay was supposed to start off at the maintenance level, and then every payment in and out of court was supposed to be digital, down to lawyer fees and so forth. That actually is part of the law that was passed for payment in and out of court.
Yes, thank you. That is what Member Dayal Singh was getting at. Yes, for you to say that in your everyday life, you are in fact using and can use fintech. You see, when you talk about fintech, it sounds like something so esoteric, and that doesn't affect me. But here it is that this affects a wide range of people. So it is not, what we're talking about today is not something that is remote. Because when you're talking about using your cards and so to pay your bills, fintech is simply financial technology, using technology. So it's not something that is outside of people's experiences, but things that you have been using, but not relating it to this strange word that has crept into our vocabulary, fintech. It is something that we are indeed familiar with without knowing it by that particular name. So it's in everyday use. It is, of course, there is room to increase the use, but it is not something that is foreign. All right, so
yeah. I just want to add, Corp is over 40-something thousand people, and if we are a population of what 1 point, something, right? And Corp is only for adults with kids. I think we are close to 1% of the population using technology, and something close to like 10% of the adult population using fintech technology with Corp. Just to add to that.
And share that's why I contextualize my question to ask members who are responding. Talk to the man in the street, because you are quite right, Chair. We have been using this. If I could use an example, money transfer, MoneyGram and all those things that have been in use in Trinidad and Tobago for donkeys of years. Is that an example of fintech? It's not.
No, that's a legacy solution that you go into a location, they use digital technology for communication, but you're not actually providing value to the people using technology. They still walk with a piece of paper, they still write down, I want money, they hand it to someone, there's no use of technology. Now, if I could send money from the US to you straight on your phone, Honorable Senator, through an application, then I'm using technology to help you with your financial situation. Okay. That's a fintech.
So my last intervention from a marketing perspective I think if the fintech industry is to really catch a fire with the general public, I think the sellers of this technology really need to bring it down to the level that the ordinary citizen could understand, and not talk to ourselves as persons who may, be aware of it. Just bring it down so the taxi driver, the man in the street could understand. So that's my last intervention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, member. I think that member Lachmidiel had a hand up for a little while. I don't want you to get cramp.
Yes.
And so please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Through you, I just wanted to ask a question based on what was said about court pay. Now, court pay was rolled out for maintenance prior to COVID. And with the advent of COVID, we saw a couple of other payment methods being implemented by the judiciary for the to make payments. For example, our legal law association fees and so on. We can do it now. Is there room? You mentioned other things that WePay could be used for in the judiciary or perhaps other sectors. Is there room? You spoke about the U-turn system. You spoke about, I think, another program. You mentioned Ministry of Trade. Have these things come on board? Are they there? Are they ready to come on board? And if they haven't actually been rolled out, what are the challenges that you're facing with rolling out those additional solutions that you mentioned?
Thank you, member. Maria, I think I'm going to give you a nod here now. I think this is the point Maria was trying to get across. So yes, we have done some good stuff with court pay, but then there's challenges in terms of enablement. After being very successful with court pay, the judiciary was then told that they can't move forward with expansion in some of these services by the Treasury because the Treasury added a new rule that a bank needs to provide this as the service. Now, right there and then shows what the problem is, and that's where Maria, I think, was going. You have a working solution, but then red tape steps in. You have a working solution, court pay for maintenance. The judiciary wants to expand into, other services because it's making it very convenient to pay into court. And then to open a bank account, the Treasury told them, no, you can't open a bank account to provide these additional services. When asked why, they said, listen, there's a new, directive. And John Orchard would know about this because he was actually one of those people working on this thing. And the new directive is, WePay, who's a fintech, technology company, we don't handle your money. We have a banking partner, right? So the court would have a direct relationship with the bank, but they're utilizing WePay's technology. Was told that we couldn't provide the court with a solution. The banks need to provide the court with a solution. And the judiciary was like, no, the bank provide financial fiduciary responsibility of the funds, not the technology. But this direction came from the Treasury. So the entire thing right now, so I can tell you, the fines and fees part of it was halted or stopped in 2020 because we require to open a new bank account because those funds were separate from maintenance, and that was stopped by the Treasury. I know John probably working on something new, but since 2020 to now, we haven't been able to move forward because of that, red tape that came up.
Yeah, and Chair, I think it might be a good opportunity, as Alden was alluding to provide some clarity, because again, this is the forum to provide clarity and to really bring it down to the man in the street as to why fintech may not have sort of accelerated the way it was, and some of the work that the IFC is doing in relation to what Alden was mentioned, and using the court pay as a perfect example. So just to provide some clarity, and these are things that would have been expressed on the first JSC, there are requirements in terms of supporting policies, regulations, and obviously legislative changes to really promote the adoption in fintech in government. Now I'm saying government in a more meaningful way, right? Because we do have the Exchequer and Audit Act. And the Exchequer and Audit Act is one of those key pieces of legislation that needs to be amended because that is really what governs in terms of how the state basically sort of receives money, right? And one of the key challenges within that act, and again, it's because when it was developed, it really wasn't considering all of these new advancements and the ability to accept payments in the way you need to accept payments. And to what Alden was sort of alluding to, and this has been one of the key focuses from the IFC and some of the advancements, I guess I would use this forum to sort of speak to in terms of the challenges Alden was sort of expressing. You have to have regulations basically developed, which I would simply call procedures and processes, because you have to understand from a ministry's point of view that has been basically collecting cash and reporting on the cash manually, right? In terms of how many $100, how many $20, how many $5, etc., and then that goes to the central bank. So it's a completely new operating model, particularly from a finance perspective within government, right? Now, notwithstanding that these regulations that need to be drafted basically are regulations to prescribe to say if a government needs to collect money, let's say via WePay, via credit card, via cash vouchers, you need to have regulations basically drafted to instruct and to basically guide the accounting officer within the ministry in terms of this is how you need to treat with it. These are the sort of processes and controls internally that you need to put in place. And then obviously these are the sort of considerations from a security, in terms of consumer protection, and how you deal with the public in terms of enabling these solutions. So Alden was right in terms of there was that gap initially where there were not financial instructions developed to sort of treat with these new payment methods. And that has been the work of the IFC for the past, I would say, 5 months, where to date now, the instructions to allow for online debit and credit card have been approved and passed back in 2020. That would have allowed these ministries to start being able to accept credit cards. And then of March this year, the Minister of Finance approved the regulations, again, using the judiciary as a use case to now allow service providers to collect money via the agents and so forth.
I think we need to provide facts, right? It took the Ministry of the Attorney General 6 months to get 2 laws passed for court pay. We're talking about 2020 and 2022, right? Some of the instructions that's coming from the Ministry of Finance is that banks need to provide credit and debit card. Credit and debit card is digital payments, my friend. That's not fintech, right? That's not new technology.
No, but to clarify, right? There isn't any instructions that say banks need to provide it, right? I'm going back to
you're talking from your point of view. I'm talking from the instructions that was given to us by the judiciary while the system is paused and meetings that I had with the Treasury. I am bringing to the chair and the members and the people that's listening, what is the issue? Since 2020, when corporate stopped, we have rolled out in the country of Jamaica, Grenada, Guyana, 4 versions of the same thing that we're talking about here. And you're talking about laws to be passed in the last 5 months. I am saying the problem is that whole narrative of, we need to create legislation. We created legislation. How corporate have been working for the last, 2018 to now, and not once a data breach? We use software as a service from Amazon to provide you with security.
No, I agree with you all. I just want to
let me finish my point.
Clarify the term. It's not legislation I'm referring to.
Can I finish my point?
Regulations, which is
all right.
Long time frame.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, members, for your input. But since we have you on the floor, Mr. Outridge, we would move over to the Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center. Mr. Scotland has to leave, so I want to give him an opportunity to ask questions of you before we lose him to another appointment that he has. So now you are on the floor, and we will return to Mr. Wayne later on.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. Chair, this question really, and it follows on from the discussion and the very interactive discussion. I would want to know, Chair, how does the financial center, how does Fintech, how does WePay, what are they doing to engage the public in East Port of Spain, the public in St. James, the public in Woodbrook? What are you doing to educate and bring awareness? What programs or what plans do you have in mind to bring the information to that segment of our society that will enable them to have confidence and to buy into the system? That's the first question.
Sure.
Audrey? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Member Scotland. And it's a good question. Talking about the promotion and the marketing of these such services, particularly, and Alvin and Maria would have mentioned, right? We refer to them as the sort of underbanked, right? Those persons who traditionally will not use their bank account only for the purpose of employment, receiving the salary, but then choosing to basically withdraw the money and transact in cash, right? And it's all about communication, and it's right now it's about education and financial literacy at the end of the day, right? Now, and I think Colin was making that point, and this is why, the work as WePay as an example, being one of those first fintechs, aiming at persons within that particular segment, because that's really where the focus should be. The persons who are not traditionally part of the formal economy, so for persons who may be into that segment and who may not have trust in the current sort of makeup of the financial infrastructure, your traditional savings accounts, your traditional banking products, and so forth, right? Those who may not even meet those sort of requirements. And this allow me to give some overview and then talk about in terms of what we'll be doing to sort of help engage that. So one of the key things is, in terms of the communication, right? There's one thing to communicate, but the other thing is you need to have something to say, particularly to those persons within that segment, right? And, as Maria would have mentioned, COVID would have accelerated a lot of different things to basically provide for persons, particularly within that sort of segment. So in 2020, there was an amendment based by the Central Bank and the Ministry of Finance to basically allow for reduced KYC measures for persons who were receiving below a particular salary level. Again, this was to help provide them for the ability to go into a bank and not to be presented with onerous requirements, particularly from a KYC perspective, so that they can open an account and be part of all of these salary grant payments and so forth, right? Now, that was a measure. And again, these are things that need to have discussions, and this is where the financial inclusion aspect comes from, right? Another initiative, again, even from what we sort of discussing when we talk about the role of fintech and kind of keeping it very simple, we need to have fintech in the context in terms of what we need here in Trinidad. I know Alvin sort of mentioned it, right? We can't be looking at fintech as simply a solution looking for a problem. We need to understand what are our problems, what are our barriers and challenges, and what really is the segment of the population we really need to move to drive the adoption. Based on the work that we would have done in terms of our surveys, yes, we do have a very high penetration level of bank accounts and access, but usage is extremely low. We have people who are not using their financial services, their financial products. Again, we don't understand what those things are. So one of the key things we do from a communication perspective, this month we will be starting the work to do a national financial inclusion survey, which is supposed to assist us in helping understand from the communication point, meeting the man on the street, what really are your barriers and your challenges in terms of the financial sector? Are these products fit for you? Why do you transact in cash? What do you do from your day-to-day? So that these things could then be used, this data and this information could be used to assist entities like Fintech TT, the regulators, the government, public data, to really help understand and sort of provide solutions for these persons within that segment. This is why when we started in terms of the work that we are doing, particularly from a Ministry of Finance perspective, our focus wasn't on looking at people who have cards to make payments. That's a very, very small percentage of the population, probably around 200,000 persons out of, a potential working population of about 800,000. And then if you look at the general population, 1.3 million, as Maria said. So we started with looking in terms of the same work that Olin would have mentioned. How do you leverage the payment service providers or those cash agents that are across the country that have over 3,000 different locations, your NLCBs, your PAYs, your Massy Show Pay, your WePays? How do you leverage those sort of technologies to get those persons who transact in cash to at least start participating and being part of that economy, being able to pay, for example, a fee or fine with judiciary, right? Or even on your invoice, being able to receive social disbursements via those same mechanisms. So starting with that, which again, that regulation has been approved. So anybody who is a PSP now, that method of payment has been approved to be used in government. Now we're working on implementation. The idea is now working with the communication plan and the strategy to start to work with the ministries that we do have as our sort of phase one ministries to really be the catalyst for payments. As Alden mentioned, the judiciary is one of those. They will be one of the first agencies to leverage that sort of payment. The Immigration Division, the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of the Attorney General Legal Affairs, the Registrar General Department, and the Ministry of Works and Transport. Because again, these agencies deal with a very large percentage of the population, very different customer demographics, and communicating. And this is why I mentioned to the conversation I was having with Alwyn, the instructions are a very key part of that, because again, what you don't want is for a ministry to enable this new form of payment, but then those processes, the consumer part of it, how it's supposed to be used, how your people internal to the ministry are supposed to behave in terms of if something goes wrong, how do they treat with the customer, all of those customer processes and policies are documented in those instructions so that when that service goes live, because one of the obviously key things, and this is for any business, you basically offering, you are collecting payments digitally, but then your service delivery needs to match the pace and the speed in terms of how you receive those payments, meaning that if I get a payment for a birth certificate, that birth certificate should be distributed equally fast. So those are the, starting from that is where we will be seeing, as we do the implementation, we'll be working with those ministries to sort of communicate, again, outside of the inclusion survey with the man in the street, how do you use these services? Because adoption is key.
Chairman, through you.
Yes, certainly.
I've seen as part of the TTIFC's mandate that its responsibilities were augmented to the and one of the areas is facilitating and advancing financial inclusion where needed in key segments of the society. Can I ask, and I want a very crisp answer, which segments of the society were identified as being in need of financial inclusion? Which segments?
So we don't have the deep data in terms of when we say specific segments in terms of your sort of personas, right? Where we are starting from is that we do have a good sense of persons who are not within the financial infrastructure of the segment, right? Those persons, for example, from the social development program, right? Persons who do not have bank accounts, as I mentioned, persons who operate below a particular income level. That is why we are doing this National Financial Inclusion Survey to really understand, because again, when we use these terms unbanked and unbankable and so forth, it's very broad. We don't really have a deep sense in terms of where really are the challenges, where it's being experienced. Is it in South Trinidad, East Trinidad, West Trinidad, North Trinidad? We really don't know. You know, we kind of speak about it very esoterically. So this is one of the key objectives of that survey, to then come back to provide that.
And when can you, because without the knowledge, and I don't know, Chair, it could be me, sometimes I am thick between the air, but without the knowledge, how do we then target if we don't have the target or the potential target group, but then we are just not being scientific? How?
Well, I don't think it's so. I know generally, right? And again, we sort of see this looking at, let's say, the state as an example, right? Using that as a sort of indicator. Right now, government receives revenue on a large volume of it, although right now you have majority of cash and checks, and there are some government agencies that take links payments. You know, a large percentage of that is transacted in cash. Even with us discussing with the banks and so forth, the usage on those accounts, as Maria mentioned, we did participate in a study with the Latin American Development Bank, CAF, in 2021, which again worked with the central bank and the other stakeholders. So we did have some indicative data in terms of working with the banks and understanding that a large percentage of the population, because when we looked at some of the larger banks, the larger state banks, they had account ownership, about 600,000, 400,000 and so forth. But the usage simply was not there. It was simply, the statistics showed it was just accounts created because it was an employer sort of obligation, but the transactions were still happening in cash. So again, this is where we're using that as a starting point, but we need to understand a bit more because that study didn't cover that sort of in-depth details.
And Chair, may I ask, piggybacking on that, have you identified any areas or any segments of society which are least prepared to make a transition to a cashless society? Please say yes.
Yes, it's our focus, but I can't tell you we have identified the key segment. And when I say key segment, I want to be very clear from that, right?
Yes.
So we do know that part of financial inclusion, there also comes gender equality, right? And it also comes in terms of when we say segment, is it that we are dealing with women in society, single mothers, Is it that we are dealing with the, adolescents? Those are the things that we want to get drilled down deeper in terms of, we do know that when we do look at certain regulations and we look at certain practices by institutions, it is very difficult for a single mother to open a bank account, or even a housewife, you need to get there's a lot more different requirements that you would need to sort of go through. And these are the key things, as I mentioned, right, where we need to kind of get a little more deep dive and really get some of that data. So we need to come back to this committee and say, where are the real key segments that we need to start with? Right now, it's very broad-based, but I hope that provides a little clarity when we start to talk about segment, male, female, age, demographic, etc.
Can I ask you, Chair? Sorry, Chair, you go.
I was just wondering if you examine some of the challenges. You spoke earlier about 19 to 20-year-old, you talk about adolescents and so on. You just mentioned en passant the age. Have you really looked at some of the challenges of the more mature in the society, the elderly in particular, the challenges that face them and how to overcome those challenges?
So we have worked, for example, with the Trinidad and Tobago Association of Retired Professionals. So we have spent some time working with different agencies, but looking at those sort of generational cohorts as a start, particularly on what we would classify as the silence. What are some of the challenges with them in terms of as it relates to financial services? Because, one of the intuitively we see this, right? We see persons within that particular segment, they prefer to go to line up to the bank to deal with a teller and a cashier. They're not so accurate in terms of the online banking and the infrastructure and so forth. And, literacy and understanding and trust. And I know trust is going to be a key theme in here because, when you are dealing with, and you see the banks now sort of really getting their own programs to really educate the population, even Scotiabank going as far to say that, we will not allow you into the branch to deal with certain transactions. Please use the ATM to deposit your cash, for example. Please use online banking, etc. So we have done some initial work and understanding, and a key part of it is just simply the transparency around the service, and then obviously providing more training in terms of using the various technologies. And I think Helen sort of mentioned that because we do have varying maturity, and this is where fintech comes in, right? Because when you look at certain banking platforms and so forth, it may be daunting to certain persons, but like I know Alden will touch on this later, this is where fintech comes in, who basically are technology companies who are working to sort of simplify that interface to make it sort of ubiquitous. And this is where we are sort of driving to make sure that fintechs can play a role. And to Maria's point, the bank's job is to be bulletproof. It's to keep your money safe. It's to protect against any sort of issues because the financial sector is the most heavily regulated sector globally. Now, this is where the fintechs come in because they have the ability to, what I would call, get a sort of human touch onto that aspect. So that is one of the key things that we sort of saw.
Madam Chair?
Yes, Mr. Scotland, please proceed.
Yes. Bearing in mind the increased mandate what additional resources was acquired by TTIFC in order to effectively execute this new mandate, this new mission? I'm a three, Chair. What was done? Anything? Chair, that was my last question.
Sure, thanks.
For this entity.
Thanks, Member Scotland. So when the mandate was changed to your point back in April last year, the company did undertake a skills gap analysis. I started with the company of August last year. And from since then, we have sort of basically revamped the entire organizational structure of the company. The company is really sort of split in each operational area to focus on these three things of the mandate. So we have a manager of financial inclusion whose sole job is to basically look at and to basically provide answers. So some of the questions that you are asking to work on basically developing not only the understanding of the sector, but also working towards developing a national financial inclusion strategy. In terms of a government and a policy perspective, what do we need to provide to really get people to be part of that cashless vision? Also, from a digitization of payments agenda, a manager to lead that particular aspect. And then we're also looking to bring in a manager in terms of developing the fintech ecosystem. And again, having senior associates under each of these managers to sort of drive the mandate. So we have been making changes and also to supplement, because again, the TTIFC is a small team, but we have been able to achieve a lot working with stakeholder arrangements such as the UNCDF, the Commonwealth, the Fintech Association, and other agencies to help augment our capabilities and to deliver.
Thank you. Now, you said the shift in focus was moved from solely attracting foreign direct investment as the primary mandate of the company to being the agency that drives increasing cashless adoption. So what impact will this transition have on the foreign direct investment flows that have been realized through increased regional engagement?
Thanks, Chair. And a very good question. I recently returned from Miami last night. Meeting with some US fintech entities to basically discuss exactly that. And what has been the challenge in terms of why we haven't been seeing the sort of uptake in fintech regionally, not only from a Trinidad perspective, right? And one of the key deficiencies that was described was really our sort of lack of infrastructure. And allow me to sort of expand, right? And this is why one of the key pillars of the TTIFC is how to establish Trinidad and Tobago as a fintech-enabled hub, right? And this goes to the broader financial sector. If you look at the Caribbean, and we have been plagued with these problems, right? You know, our cross-banking relationships basically are hanging on a piece of string, right? We use these global payment systems like SWIFT, which doesn't really provide the sort of convenience, and it doesn't really provide the type of capabilities that we sort of need. And then you have these larger companies that you see in sort of propping up, right? So you have the Amazons, you have the Netflix, you have these international companies who are now expanding into different regions, right? We would have seen recently Netflix, you know, they were under some pressure in terms of their share price and they needed to grow their subscriber base. So when you have a company like Netflix, for example, who is saying that, you know, I would like to enter a specific market and I would like to create a specific product for your particular market. Apart from looking at obviously your political aspect, your financial aspect, and so forth, one of the key things, and again, this is where fintech becomes a very attractive aspect for us, is that they need the requisite payment infrastructure. They need to know that that exists within your jurisdiction so that they can bring in their products and services and use the same advanced infrastructure that they use in the other markets like in the US and the UK so that they can transact. And that is something that has not been fully sort of, I would say, explored and utilized from a region perspective. So this is where we are trying to now go down that road in terms of working with the regulators, working with the banking industry, working with the fintech sector. Because again, it will benefit the fintechs, and Olwen could provide clarity on that, where, you know, we get the these large payment gateways, we get these large facilitators basically to come in and provide those rails that, again, will support these international companies doing business in our economy, setting up operations, and then attracting their international clients to offer services not only to our jurisdiction. Maria mentioned to that point, we are a small population of 1.4 million, right? But when you look at the Caribbean as a whole, it could be calculated to easily 70 million when you factor in our diaspora. So the Caribbean as a market, I realize is becoming very attractive. And then from our perspective in Trinidad, we still are a gateway into the Americas. And you still have that need for that infrastructure. So that's really where our focus is, and that is why the focus was sort of shifted, seeing how the sector has evolved, what really are the sort of needs that these companies are looking for. And as I mentioned, the sort of underscore was really around that infrastructure to allow you to provide for payments and cross-border.
Thank you very much. So let me give you a little respite here and go to Mr. Wayne, putting back Mr. Wayne, WePay, center stage. Still there with us?
Yeah, being entertained.
Chair, through you, I have a commitment and I have to leave shortly, but I do have a couple of questions, burning questions for Mr. Wayne, if you would permit me.
Yes, I most certainly will.
Thank you, Chair. So Wayne, I've been looking into this WePay thing because I use QuartPay and my clients do, so I was intrigued by it. But I found an article that said that your company moved its headquarters to Jamaica. I think this is in 2020. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could you tell us, the reason for that and what prompted you to do that? And while you're at it, tell me then, with your being headquartered in Jamaica, obviously you could be in a position to give us a bit of a comparison. Could you give us a comparison of the experiences you've had between Trinidad and Jamaica so far?
Thank you, member. Pay me on the spot, but I love to be on the spot. It kind of draws back into what I was laughing at when, so I know John really well, and I understand the mandate that he has, and he's doing a good job in the last 5 years, trying to, steady a ship that, caused the largest fintech to leave Trinidad and go to Jamaica. This is before John's time, so I'm putting you under the bus, John. But the issue is, just what John just mentioned. You come to the U.S. I'm actually based in the U.S. now. We're launching a bank called Color Bank here in Wynwood. We just got a contract with the Sheriff Association across America to use a Trinidad-based company to process into all the Sheriff County jails, pilot starting in Flint, Michigan next month. And we're from Trinidad, but we're going to do this for America. But in Trinidad, you have, the Fintech Association. Am I a member of the Fintech Association, John? I don't think so. And we actually built the first platform that demonstrated how technology could work with TTIFC, Endpoint Fortin, and PwC in 2019. But the red tape, unnecessary red tape, we built QuartPay, right? No failure, but yet still you're saying to me that you got to figure out a way how to do, QuartPay version 2, a process and procedures that needs to be put in place to manage how the judiciary is going to deal with payments. They have been dealing with payments for the last 4 years digitally. They were the state entity with the least technical know-how. They were putting court cases on pieces of paper in drawers. Now they're more advanced than every ministry because they didn't have to listen to the crap that, to the things that, the red tape that, government normally put in place when it comes to making these decisions, right? And you hear QuartPay works, but you know what? We can't do QuartPay 2 because we got to figure out some legislation. It works. Version 2 is just a different bank account. But you need to figure out the procedure. It's the same procedure that's working now. That hasn't failed. That's one of the reasons why, all right? So imagine this. You initiate QuartPay. All the praises, great. Pass laws. Then version 2, red tape. GovPay. It works in TTBS. Let's go into Ministry of Works and Transportation. We do a whole presentation with U-turn. Let's stop because you know why? We need to get a bank to do processing for U-turn, not WePay. which if they actually understand the technology, we are just the technology. We still at a bank doing the payments, but they don't understand the space. So they use intervention, I would say, to slow down progress in Trinidad and Tobago. So all the traveling to Miami, John, and you're my friend, personal friend. You didn't call me last night when I was in Miami. I'm hurt. I can't see any one of my peers here in Miami, in Wynwood, coming to Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sorry. I have nothing to do with infrastructure, right? We have TST and Flow. We have a bunch of fiber coming into the country. We have fantastic infrastructure. We have a fantastic educated public due to, free gate, right? All my staff in Trinidad, 30-something of them, are all educated in Trinidad. So we have all the resources. Is the bureaucracy is the problem? And to answer your question, member, why we moved to Jamaica? Because they did not have the level of red tape and bureaucracy involved in making simple decisions. If something works, use it, not fill an agenda. Right? Corporate works is not moving forward because there's an agenda. In Jamaica, we just signed a $4 billion contract for distribution of government funds. $4 billion. The same time we signed that, what was on the news in Trinidad? Supermarket Association missing monies to distribute cash. This was in October last year. When we're trying to distribute money in Trinidad and Tobago through the Supermarket Association, we're missing money. So tell me, if you have a company that provides this value, and in one island they're saying, hey, let's try to figure it out. And the other island, they're saying, okay, let's use it. The decision was very easy for me to make. It wasn't my decision to make, right? The bureaucracy made the decision. The ease of doing business is the problem, right? So, I can tell you, the TTIFC plan, the first thing you all need to, and this is just my humble advice, John, is remove all the barriers to do business. Remove or limit it. The Ministry of Finance shouldn't be getting involved in technical decisions. Manage money, not technology. And once we get to that point, then you'll see adoption. If you Google WePay Jamaica, Google WePay Washington, D.C., you would see the things that we are doing. But not in Trinidad. WePay Grenada, we just did the payouts for the government of Grenada for their school program, and we're doing it for the pension. In Guyana, we do payments for the Guyana Civil Aviation. Why does it work everywhere else but Trinidad with government? Ask John.
Well,
that's your ministry.
Yeah. I'm happy to hear you mention pensions and so on, because one of the things that I have always been concerned about, well, two things really, is one, people cashing pension checks at supermarkets and so on, where there's very limited oversight and the risk of money laundering. And two, the lines that I see outside of banks every month, and consisting primarily of very elderly people standing in hot sun or rain, waiting to cash a pension check that has come through post. And let me say, three, the reports of pension checks being stolen at post offices. And if there's a solution to that, and a simple solution that a company like WePay could provide, because like I said, I've had the experience of using PortPay, and it's, I don't know, yeah, it's great. And I understand the judiciary has a little more flexibility than ministries. But well, certainly everything that you've said, I think will have to find its way through our report and some sort of a recommendation. But I just to follow up on this, you mentioned that there is still a role for the bank, and that perhaps it's not being understood properly by the persons making the decisions. Has the Bankers Association come on board to meet with, let's say, the Fintech Association, the providers like WePay, and the government people and the decision makers to explain this? And are they on board with all of this? Because I have let me give you a simple example like this. I have a small business. I'm a sole practitioner, and I had to open a business bank account when I came out into private practice. And I was told that I couldn't get a checking account. I had to use a simple business savings account, and I had to operate it for a number of years before I could get a checkbook. A checkbook. In this day and age, a checkbook. Right? And I think banks in Trinidad really are behind in terms of technology. We talked about internet banking becoming more important during COVID and so on, but I don't know that they really understand technology, because it's horrible. It's horrible. Internet banking is horrible. As a user of internet banking, I think it is atrocious what passes as technology and internet banking in Trinidad and Tobago. Because I have a bank account in the US as well that I use from here, and it's easier to operate my bank account in the US from Trinidad than it is to operate my Trinidad bank account. So I just want to know, has the Bankers Association, gotten on board with the fintech people and those who are pushing fintech and the rolling out of fintech and the fintech companies to assist in this drive and to make the cohesion happen for us?
So that's a great question, and this is just my point of view. I work with all the banks in Trinidad. To answer the first part of the question, the fintech industry, it's made up of two root words: financial, which is the fin, and the tech, which is the technology. Companies like us who are not, we are regulated by the central bank, but for technology development companies, they just provide the tech. You still need the underlying financial institution to maintain the integrity and the security of movements of money, as John was mentioning, right? You still want the rails of the existing banking infrastructure so that in that society, you're not worried about, this solution, de-risking the country or making something fall apart. So yes, the banking sector is critical. Without the banking sector, there's no fintech. It's just tech. And that's the problem I don't think a lot of the banks kind of get, I would compare to, the largest bank in the world is Bank of America. But yet still PayPal processes more payments than Bank of America. That's a tech company. But PayPal actually have a bank behind it, right? This is what they need to understand. The technology part just meets that last mile need. What the person on the ground, like you just mentioned, you want to find a nice, easy way to access the money in your bank account with a nice app, let the fintech do that part and let the bank fix the money, right? But in Trinidad, my experience is they think, along the lines that they need to develop a department to manage the technology, right? And that's not what you're supposed to be doing, in my view anyway. If you're a bank, be the best bank, provide as much of your banking services as possible, and use a technology partner to make that last mile, that ease of operability, that user experience to be great, but still comes back right into a bank, right? And that's the difference. If a bank thinks that, hiring two people to develop an app is fintech, then they don't understand it. Digital payments, online payments is not financial technology as it should be done. That's just digital payments and digital solutions on top of your banking infrastructure, right? What you need is an entire company. John was talking about what research has been done. We worked with TTIFC and PwC in 2019, and we got people from Point Fortin, people from San Fernando, from doubles vendors, all the way up to bar owners. And we ran a pilot for about 2 months, had a research paper done, understand what the Trinidad market and those small people that the banks won't do a research on because those people can't get bank accounts. And we do have a paper on that. We do understand what the market needs. And that's how we now bring solutions to the market. In Jamaica, we just bought a solution where you could use your phone, where you could tap on your phone, and this is now your point-of-sale device. So those people that sell at the cruise ship entrance places and who sell jerk chicken, they don't need a point-of-sale terminal. We did that research and we came up with a solution that meet them at that point in need. This is what needs to be done, not have the banks do a research on customers that's not even their target audience, based on the limitations that they have. So I'm not blaming the banks. As John mentioned, there are corresponding banking relationships. We are grey listed just by the fact that we are in the Caribbean. You heard Nigel spoke about it. They have to actually not onboard a customer in fear of being de-risked. So since the bank has that position, allow the fintech to handle the other part of the business.
Okay, let's stick up in there then. One of the AML-CFT requirements and grey listing and all of that has, I think, caused a lot of people to remain unbanked now, and even they've unbanked people, right, when they conduct their due diligence and so on, because they're required to by law. And do you feel that using the fin side now, the tech side for the financial institutions, would there be a big risk exposure for them? And is enough in place to keep out that money laundering risk and to mitigate against the money laundering risk when you roll out technology? Because that might be the critical factor in bringing the fin and the tech together.
So that's the point, but it's a very simple answer. CFT, counter-terrorist financing, AML, anti-money laundering policies and so forth. That deals with money leaving Trinidad and Tobago and getting in the hands of terrorists. For you to do that, that money has to be able to work outside, right? If we're doing low KYC accounts that only operate in TT dollars, that cannot receive money internationally or transfer money internationally, you have that protection of local currency only accounts. It's like a credit union. You can only move money within this circle here. So guess what? Creating a bank account, you have, the ability to receive payments from somebody outside or make payments to somebody outside. So all those rules that, protects that bank from being susceptible or being, part of any terrorist financing, has to go into every account that they open. But if the banks now say, okay, just like a credit union, we give you a custodial account and you're custodians of all your customers. These accounts are only going to be TT dollar accounts and it can only move in between each other. Then you don't have that risk of terrorist financing. So that lower KYC account, which can only work in TT dollars and only move between each other, provides that protection compared to a regular bank account that you open, which has all that need for protection. Because if you open a bank account right now, it has to have all those rules, in place to protect the bank against, some of those international standards international problems that.
Is there a big market?
Yes.
Sorry, is there a big
Wait,
market?
hold on. Could I just add something? Because I think we have to be factual in what we see in here. So recently, when I mean recently, in the last year, the requirements for opening a bank account have been changed, right? So that people, the central bank changing laws, you have to understand that a lot of this is driven by central bank requirements as well. And central bank did change the regulations so that for smaller accounts, which is the target we're talking about here, the requirements to open a bank account have been reduced. So I think we need to just, let people know that has been reduced. I think we also need to understand that the banks, and to give some perspective on your question on the online banking, they have been improving in the last 6 months. Because one, if they didn't have adoption, they're looking at it as a business case. If we don't have enough transactions, changing our technology didn't make sense. But then if you think about one bank took a position to push people to go online by saying, I'm not going to give you statements. I don't want people who are not doing online banking. So there's a balance here. But yes, we do need the technology to be improved. We are, like, checkbooks could be gone for a long time now if you have these systems in place. But I think we have to take a balanced view here that it can't be a free-for-all either.
That's the problem. That's the problem. We don't need a balanced view. We need the real view. The banks cannot lead technology. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying this is more than just a WePay solution. This has nothing to do with WePay, Maria Daniel. This is to deal with how we approach the problem. The banks, you just said it, it's not financially viable for them to fix online. That's your problem. That's the industry's problem. You think WePay start off making profit? No, we were trying to help the poor man, the small man on the street get paid. The banks didn't do it because it was costly. And if Trinidad and Tobago continue to only depend on something that makes financial sense or makes benefit to the banks, that's why we're in that position. So you saying to me, it's bothering me to hear that from the Fintech Association point of view, the bank
I did not say that.
Changes to
I did
online.
not say that.
All right, one at a time, please.
Okay, so
one at a time, please.
Right?
I did not say that. We obviously need these solutions. I'm agreeing. I am just saying,
that's not fair for the bank to come on. But this is my point, right?
I was explaining and agreeing with you, actually, that the reason they did not put these systems in place because there was no business case. Hence, that is the reason fintechs were born. So I'm not disagreeing with you. What I'm saying,
fair enough. So I was trying to figure out what's fair.
Could I just get back to my question?
Yes,
sorry.
please.
Yes. So, I mean, the thing about it is, and I'm asking, what was said there about the banks not getting on board? And I mean, why I talked about the state of internet banking and so on. But it's exactly that. It may not be profitable for them to invest because they have less users, but it's a chicken and egg argument. If you have better technology, you'll probably get more users. Because right now, some of the internet banking platforms look like a teenager who just learning coding developed it. And the fact of the matter is that if you have better technology, you will actually get more buy-in and people may actually want to use it, more user-friendly. So that's the first point. The second point is that central bank changed the rules to implement simplified due diligence because that is a FATF requirement to not allow for de-risking and widespread de-risking, which is something that we saw for many years in this country taking place when we initially had passed the updated financial obligations regulations. The third thing is, let me just ask a quick question here because I do have to move on to something, another matter. But when you mentioned about I looked at WePay's submission and you talked about the purchasing of vouchers. Now, when I worked at the FIU and even in my private practice, I found that persons using cash and coming to a government institution with cash to conduct transactions, there's absolutely no due diligence being done. And you can walk into, for example, Fintech or WASA, and you could pay $10,000 in cash over the counter on your light bill or your phone bill or water rate or whatever it is, and nobody asks for a source of funds declaration. What type of technology or what kind of safeguards would WePay have in a case where you're selling vouchers to people? Can I now, as a drug dealer, take my cash that I've earned selling drugs and walk into the judiciary and buy vouchers, which I will use to pay for, well, right now it's just maintenance, but if the voucher system continues to pay for many other things like fines and penalties, to take bail for my cohorts to do things like that, what are the protections in place? Because I'll tell you this, there was a case that came to my attention where someone deliberately used to make payments, large sums of cash, over the counter at a utility company. And I've spoken about this even in Parliament. And deliberately, they would quote the wrong account number by one digit being off. And then they would go into the utility company thereafter and say, I made an error and I paid on the wrong account. This is not my account. This is actually my account. Can you refund me? And they would cut a check for him. And he was literally laundering money through a utility company, laundering his dirty cash through a public utility company. So what will we have in place to mitigate against those risks going forward if we decide to use things like top-up vouchers and so on?
Fantastic question. And that question was the same question the central bank brought up when we actually tried to introduce this, which is actually regulated by the central bank of Trinidad and Tobago. So the central bank asked that question. And to answer it quite simply, the fact that you could only pay to your account means that your monies that you pay into court pay, if I'm paying you maintenance, I know who made the payment. It's me to me. So it's not an open loop system where I can come and pay to John or to Maria. When the matter is handled at court, you create your own court pay account in the name of John Outridge, right? Sorry, John, you're just on the screen, I'm sorry. And when you go to buy a top-up, the only place that you could pay that court money is into John Outridge's account. So all we do is digitize John's money. John now makes his payment to Maria. The fact of the matter is that entire transaction is on a ledger that we know John made $200 payment. It's trackable to Maria, into Maria's bank account. So we have the audit trail more than cash because we know when it was created, when it came into the system. John is the only one who could put John's money into his account, and John then moves the money from there. So because you have an account that's now auditable, that's how we track the transaction. So it's a bit more tracking than cash.
So what I'm getting at though, if John is a drug dealer and John has a significant amount of cash that he wants to use, poor John, I see we have two Johns, but anyway, but he wants to use his cash now at a public facility. What I'm getting at is, do we need customer due diligence requirements, KYC and so on, to be implemented at state agencies? That's the bottom line, because that's something that I've toyed with for a long time. If we are going to, as you say, the biggest clients and the biggest client base that we have might be the public and for the government. And I personally feel that when you have government buy-in into something, then it's easier for private sector to come on board afterwards. So if we have to get government buying and buy-in into this fintech thing, do we need to have financial obligations regulations extended to state agencies, state enterprises, and so on. So that, let's say, for example, they cannot cut a check to someone other than the person that they have contracted to do work for. Let's see.
Let me just support.
Let me add the court pay and I'll send it to you, John. So for court pay, to your question, yes, we collect the KYC on the fact that when you sign up for court pay on the courthouse, both the payer and the recipient need to provide KYC. But that's on the court pay to answer your question. John, I'll let you answer now, which the bigger regulatory part that you were working on.
Right, and it's a good question, and I'm glad I'm just coming back to the point that we were having a discussion with Alwyn before, right, in terms of that's an excellent use case, why you need to have these financial instructions at these ministries to, again, put these policies and procedures for them to understand what they need to do to, again, de-risk the ministry. Good question you brought up in terms of people coming in with cash, because there's very little due diligence, you're right, in terms of when cash comes in. But even to Aldwin's point, when you look at what the future ecosystem looks like, you have a fintech on the front that provides you that traceability, that auditability in terms of the transaction. And then on the ministries end, this is where the instructions become absolutely important to now allow these ministries to use these services, but at the same time to protect the ministry, protect the financial system, and to really reduce any sort of incidents or risk when it comes to anti-money laundering, etc.
Right. Ms. Aldridge, I want to give you an example again, because I think it will feed us. And as a user, I think I'm well placed to speak to this. So, if you could use it going forward, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for that.
When you pay in stamp duty, if I have to pay my stamp duty via a check, let's just say I have a client who's doing a deed of gift, a simple deed of gift, but the stamp duty on the property is about $153,000. They would have to get a manager's check made out to the chairman board of Inland Revenue. So that's very trackable, etc., etc. And they have to go in with it drawn from their account and all that. But do you know that somebody could also give that $153,000 in cash to their attorney, to a court clerk, to anybody under the sun, to walk into BIR with the documents and pay it, and BIR will accept that $153,000 over the counter without asking a question? And that is, to me, they will not take a personal check, which is trackable, which the bank will keep, which 10 years from now, the Anti-Corruption Investigations Bureau, the Financial Investigation Bureau could go and pull. They will not take that personal check. It must be a manager's check, but they will accept the cash over the counter. That's a serious money laundering risk in our country, particularly when real estate is one of the most high-risk areas for money laundering. I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about money laundering, right? That's my thing. That's my area. But the government is the easiest place to launder money. It really is at this point in time. So unless we tackle that, then, and I always say you have to creep before you could walk and even before you could fly. So when we start to talk about blockchain and this one and that one and all the thing and the technology and all that, we have a lot of work to do in these simple little things that we need to get done first before anything else. A person could walk into the licensing office and pay transfer tax on, everybody's vehicle there or give to people, you can launder money through any government agency in this country, and that's a fact. And if TTIFC or central bank or somebody doesn't get on it and tackle that issue first, I don't think that financial technology will really ever be as safe as it ought to be, and that would stymie its development in the country.
No, that's an important contribution point, and thanks for that, Member Lakshmi. I think you kind of described the role of the IFC in terms of taking the baby steps in phase one, right? So you're absolutely correct. Making cash unattractive to use in the public sector and providing different channels of payments. If you use that stamp duty, as I mentioned, we're working with the attorney, the Office of the Attorney General and the Registrar General's Department as a project as well, to look at not only the civil registry, companies registry, but also the land registry. Because again, exactly what you described there, even from the perspective of writing a check to the chairman, right? The name of the chairman can even fit on the check. So that's a whole next matter.
And if you have a name like Jayanti Lakshmi, you can't fit on a check.
You can't fit on the check either, right? But we have payment systems, and again, we have the core payment systems like ECH and RTGS that businesses use to do these large transactions. We use it and so forth, but it's not very And this again come back to where we look at the implementation with the fintech, right? It's not very easy to use these systems and so forth, and a lot of people are still unfamiliar with it. But those are and when we start talking about payments into these government offices, not every payment channel might be right depending on the type of transaction, right? Because again, nobody's going to do 153,000 transaction on your credit card unless you're in Las Vegas or something, right? But the average man in the street would want to your point, your client might want to say, I could use my online bank and I could transfer that to you. You know, that's fine because again, it satisfies the traceability and the auditability, you know, and then even if you put a fintech in front of that, then you create a much simpler interface to capture a lot more data that the ACH platform wouldn't be. So, and that is exactly what you laid out, these sort of core tenants we are working with, where making the systems user-friendly, using the existing financial infrastructure and dealing with the most fundamental use cases, which we call in phase one, before we start to move to more advanced things like blockchain and all these other different things that we can understand. Just getting the ministries to sort of add on these different channels and reduce the usage of cash. That's where we kind of working with till the end of the year.
This has been a very animated discussion, and I hate to be the one to end it. But we always suffer because we are on a Friday when we have, Parliament. So I would just like to go, before I invite the closing comments, I would just like to go through some of the main points. And you started off talking about the electronic ID, this national ID. You know, you talk about the need for public education, understanding. And one of the things that came up consistently is the need for trust in the security of this technology. We spoke also about data security laws that need to be passed and people understanding of how fintech is going to benefit them. We spoke about banks, the need for banks to speak to one another, about the easy transfer of funds. We spoke a lot also about promotion of financial inclusion, who must be included and how and why. The rate of adoption of online banking is something that came up over and over again. The need for digital signatures. We spoke about the judiciary and the treasury adding new rules. We talk about red tape and the steps to curtailing expansion. We spoke about the Exchequer Act. The need again for regulations kept coming up over and over again. Promotion of financial literacy. The role of the central bank in all of this. We spoke about the development of programs of linking payments, identifying the segment of society that need to be included. The challenge of the lack of infrastructure, how to establish TNT as a fintech enabler. And last occasion, I spoke so much in praise of CourtPay and how successful it was. And here comes Mr. Alwyn Wayne today to debunk, all these good feelings that we had about CourtPay. And his sad news that he's fled to Jamaica. I really didn't think that this committee would be making headlines again in a way that we are not happy about. But what do we do? How do we remove all these barriers to doing business? How do we go about doing that? So it is a challenge for our society. It is a challenge. We speak a lot about money laundering, and yet our way of doing business is actually seen to be facilitating it. And one of the earliest inquiries that we had here, our committee, our Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs, was the ease of doing business. That's one of the earliest things that we tackled, the problems that we had, the ease of doing business. Where are we on the index? Where are we? How are we making hay so slowly? What do we do? There's a lot of work to be done. A lot of work to be done. We recognize what the problems are, but the solutions are slow in coming, slow in implementation. So are we going to continue with this implementation deficit in Trinidad and Tobago? What are we going to do? So I would like to invite the officials now to make their closing remarks, starting as we began with Fintech Association of Trinidad and Tobago.
So I will end based on your last comment, right? Rather solution-based than problem-based. And the response is very simple. We need to interact the systems. And what do I mean by that? Yes, doing business in Trinidad is difficult because one siloed process doesn't talk to the other. And John talked about processes. And the integration is building the ecosystem. The fintech solutions for the payment part cannot be done alone. The processes have to change within the ministries, sharing of data and centralized databases. That's the solution. They're actually not that difficult. Member Lutch Medial, I hope I pronounced that correctly, mentioned about the pensioners. That's actually not a difficult solution or problem to solve. You could do it with cards, you could do it with a number of different ways for that sector of society. So in closing, this is what I would say. Implementation is always a problem in Trinidad and execution because people do not work the way they have to work together. Government and private sector cannot be North Pole and South Pole. They have to be in the equator, working together. As one thing I will agree with you, Wayne, is we need to understand the problems and have the right solutions. And I think you're spot on there. There are a lot of people coming with all kinds of solutions, even in the fintech space, but I'm not sure it's a solution for our problems. So in closing, this is what I would say to governments and to the public out there. We talk a lot in Trinidad, and we need to get out of this silo, my territory type of culture, and everybody needs to work together with a task force that says, at the end of the day, cash is one of the big reasons we have corruption. And if we get rid of cash, as Alwyn said, it's traceable when it's digital. And therefore, it could only benefit society by us getting more digital and by our population understanding how that makes their life easier by doing business easier, but also from an oversight perspective, we'll be able to get data to understand where the problems are and be able to just transact easier. So the answer to your question is work together more closely and smartly.
Thank you, Ms. Daniel. Trinidad and Tobago International Financial Center.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members, and thank you to Fintech Association and WePay. I think this has definitely, to your point, Chair, been a very insightful discussion. And, the one good thing I will take away from this is we are not speaking about any theoretical aspects of fintech, right? I think the conversation was more driven in terms of we are at the point of execution. And then to Maria's point, how do we now harmonize the agenda and really come together to focus on the key problems that will allow Trinidad and Tobago to go fast as it relates to enabling fintech without breaking the entire system. Because I think that's the key balance. Balance is the message I want to leave here coming out of it. And it was good that we had WePay being part of this, because WePay was one of those first adopters that really, again, the aim was really to reduce cash, prevent people from using cash, because again, cash creates problem. We talk about social disbursement, we talk about checks, we talk about getting to the money, we talk about basically, it's all about protecting the most vulnerable in society, and cash doesn't do that. Cash actually exposes those persons. So how do we now get them to be part of the formal economy? How do we get them to really participate? How do we get them to access credit so that they can evolve themselves, they can evolve their livelihood? Because that is what fintech means from the IFC's perspective. It means financial inclusion. And this is why I think conversations like these are very important, because we want to have more WePays coming out of Trinidad and Tobago. We want to have TT developed, supported, enabled fintech companies go into other regions, other emerging economies, by solving the problems that we have, because again, all emerging economies have the same problems. And we want TNT to be a case study going forward and not just reading about what Africa did, what this one did, etc. That'll be my closing remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Wayne.
Madam Chair, I apologize for dampening your views on court pay. So I'll just start with that. I hope my somber tone, provides the sincerity in me feeling sorry for you having that impression of court pay. But court pay is fantastic. It's just the growth of court pay is what I was speaking about. And to John and Maria.
I can never take an apology with a smile. Mr. Wayne, let me have your closing remarks, please.
Chairman, that is not so.
Yeah, no, but I'm sorry if my tone today seemed a bit aggressive towards what the problems were, but I understand the market. I've been in it. Fintech is a very young industry, and I think we were the forefront of this revolution in Trinidad since 2017. So I knew a lot of the players well, John, Maria. Now I know what they stand for, and I think I needed to bring to the fore today, not what we can do, but what is stopping us from being great. All right. So I focus heavily on what we need to change. And it's just one thing for me, being here in first world markets, being in Jamaica, other territories, our problem is very simple. Let Maria and John do what they have to do without the red tape. Very simple. I know they won't say it, but that's the problem. WePay excelled in Barbados because Jamaica, because Maria Daniels in Jamaica got what needed to get done without having to answer to somebody who's not even in the technology department. So if you're asking me, Alwyn, for coming on this thing and say, what is Trinidad need to do to help the growth of this industry? Let John Outridge lead the Fintech Association without the red tape. Maria Daniels, I think I'll give you the wrong title, TTIFC, lead without the red tape. And I'm saying I do have, members of government, I do have members of parliament on her. I'm directing that directly to you guys, We don't need that oversight. We don't need that overreach in terms of developing solutions. Going to market, yeah, that's a different thing. But let the solutions be driven by the smart people who know how to develop the technology and then build regulations and regulatory approval around that before it comes to market. Sorry.
Thank you. I would like to thank the officials, all of you, for your contribution to today's proceedings. I would like to thank my committee members who participated remotely in this virtual hearing. The staff of the Office of the Parliament for your procedural and logistical support. The viewing and listening audience, especially those who have made their submissions to us, we thank you. We always value your input, which you will see that it finds its way into our report. And when the reports are submitted to Parliament, it's available to you, to website to go and read some of those old reports that we've dealt with. It's there. It's there for your information and guidance. The Bankers Association, who could not have been with us today, we thank you for your input. We value your submissions as well. So there being no other business, I declare this meeting at an end. Thank you very much, and do enjoy the weekend. And don't use any cash.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone.